Your lawn is a violation of community standards, and the fine is $400, payable within 10 days. That was the first thing Brenda Hantz ever said to me, leaning over the top rail of my own gate with a clipboard pressed to her magenta blazer like a shield. Brenda was the president of the Stone Ridge Vista Homeowners Association, 3 years into a tenure she treated as a coronation. And the lawn she was citing was a strip of dry buffalo grass on a parcel that had never belonged to her association in the first place. My name is Walter Keene. I am 61 years old, a retired reservoir operations engineer. And for 30 years, I ran the water that fills every green lawn she was so proud of. What Brenda did not know, standing there in her kitten heels on my gravel, was that the small earthen dam at the top of the draw behind my house was not a scenic pond. It was a private irrigation reservoir, decreed and recorded long before her subdivision existed. And every drop that fed the Stone Ridge Vista sprinkler system passed through a headgate that I owned outright. She had just fined me for the color of my grass. I held the water that kept hers alive. So I want to ask you something before I tell you the rest of it. If a woman with a clipboard handed you a $400 fine for a thing she had no right to touch, and you were holding the one card that could end her whole game, would you slap it down that afternoon? Or would you wait and document and let her build the rope herself? I waited. That is the part most people get wrong. I waited almost 2 years, and I wrote down every single day of it. Let me back up to how I came to own a reservoir, because it matters to everything that came after. I grew up in the high valley country where the snowmelt is currency, and a man's worth is measured by whether his ditches run clean in August. My father worked for the Regional Water District, and his father before him homesteaded the benchland above what is now the town of Carter Springs. When the family finally proved up the original claim, the most valuable thing on the paper was not the acreage. It was a decreed water right with a priority date older than the state itself, and a small storage reservoir built by hand to hold the spring runoff for the dry months. My wife Diane and I bought out the rest of the family's interest in 1991, the year our daughter was born. Diane was the one who insisted we keep the reservoir intact when the developers first came sniffing around. She said her grandmother had hauled buckets from that draw with a yoke across her shoulders before there was a pump, before there was a road, and she said it the way other people quote scripture. We were not going to sell the water just because somebody in a golf shirt waved a check at us. I remember one man in particular, back in the early 2000s, who sat at our kitchen table and slid a number across to Diane on a yellow legal pad. And Diane looked at the number, and then she folded the page in half, and then in half again, and handed it back to him folded, and said the water was not for sale at any number he could write on that pad, or any bigger one. He left. She poured the rest of his coffee down the sink. That was Diane. She passed 4 years ago in the spring, when the cottonwoods were just starting to leaf out along the draw. It was fast, and it was unfair. And I am not going to dwell on it here, except to say that the last walk we took together was up to the dam. And she put her hand flat on the concrete of the headworks, the way you would lay a hand on the flank of an old horse. And she said, "Keep it running, Walt." I kept the water, I kept the house, and I kept our daughter close, because by then it was just the two of us. And a man who has lost the center of his life learns very fast to hold on to the things that remain, and to write down where he put them. Her name is Sadie. She was 16 when this began. A tall, quiet kid with her mother's stubborn jaw and a habit of noticing things adults missed. She is the one who first told me to start a folder. I will get to that. The subdivision arrived in 2014. A development company bought the old Castellan Ranch on the flat below my bench and turned 300 acres of dryland pasture into Stone Ridge Vista, a gated community of houses with 3-car garages and lawns that had no business existing at that elevation. I watched it go up over 2 summers from my porch, the survey flags first, then the roads, then the framing crews, then the sod trucks. Grass like that does not grow up there on rainfall. We get maybe 14 inches a year, and most of that is snow. Grass like that grows on irrigation, on water moved on purpose from somewhere it collects to somewhere it does not. And the irrigation came from a canal that tapped the same draw my reservoir sat on. Under a delivery agreement the developer had signed with the original district decades earlier, an agreement that nobody at Stone Ridge Vista had apparently ever bothered to read. I knew about the agreement because I had administered it. For the last 11 years of my career, before I retired, my job was operating the storage and delivery for that entire watershed, including the canal that watered the ground Stone Ridge Vista was built on. I sat in the rooms where those deliveries were scheduled. I signed the orders that opened and closed headgates from the high country down to the valley floor. I knew exactly how much water flowed, where, on what schedule, and by whose authority, because for over a decade, the authority had partly been mine to administer. When the developer platted the subdivision, my reservoir and its headgate were carved out of the development boundary and left in my name, exactly as my family had held them, because the developer's own engineers knew the water was decreed and could not be folded into a residential plat. The HOA's founding documents, recorded at the county, drew their property line 40 feet shy of my fence, and the plat map filed alongside them showed my parcel hatched and labeled as a separate ownership with a separate water right. I had read those documents in the clerk's office the week they were recorded, the way you read the fine print on anything that touches your land. Brenda, as it turned out, had not read them at all. She had been handed a title and a clipboard, and she had mistaken the one for the authority of the other. For the first few years, none of it mattered. The houses filled up, the lawns greened. I waved at the trucks that came to mow them and went on with my mornings. Then Brenda Hantz got herself elected president of the association, and a quiet arrangement that had worked for a decade became a war over the color of my grass. It started on a Tuesday in June. I remember because Tuesday was the day I drove into Carter Springs for feed, and I had just gotten home and was unloading sacks of pellets off the tailgate when the golf cart came up my road. It was a white cart with the association crest stuck to the side, out of place on a gravel grade that was built for trucks. Brenda was driving it, with a younger woman beside her holding a camera, and she stopped at my gate without getting out, the way a person stays in their car at a drive-thru. "Mr. Keene," she said, reading my name off her clipboard like she had just learned it. "I am Brenda Hantz, president of the Stone Ridge Vista Homeowners Association. We have had complaints about the appearance of your property. Your lawn does not meet community standards, and I am issuing a notice of violation." I set the last sack down and walked down to the gate slow, wiping my hands on a shop rag. Up close, she was exactly what the golf cart promised. Magenta blazer over a pressed blouse, pearls, sunglasses pushed up on her head, though the morning was overcast. Kitten heels sinking a quarter-inch into my gravel with every shift of her weight. The younger woman beside her kept the camera up, filming. "My property isn't in your community," I said. She smiled the way a person smiles when they have decided not to hear you. "Your parcel is functionally part of our viewshed and our jurisdiction, Mr. Keene. The association covers this entire ridge." "It covers it up to 40 feet that way," I said, and pointed at the survey pin by the cattle guard, a steel rod my father had set and I had maintained for 30 years, capped and painted and unmistakable. "Everything behind this fence is mine, deeded and decreed." Brenda did not look at the pin. That was the thing about her, the thing I came to understand over the next 2 years. She never once looked at the thing that would have told her she was wrong. Her eyes went to the pin and slid right off it, back to her clipboard, where the numbers she had decided on were already written down. She handed me a folded notice through the rails, told me the fine was $400 for the lawn and another $50 for an unapproved gate color, and turned the cart around in my drive, while the younger woman filmed my mailbox and my truck and the dry grass along the fence line. Then they were gone back down the hill, and I stood at my own gate, holding a piece of paper that said I owed a stranger $450. That night, I told Sadie about it at the supper table, half laughing, expecting her to laugh too. She did not. She got up, found a clean manila folder in her school supplies, wrote the date on the tab in her careful block letters, and put the notice inside. "Dad," she said, "people like that don't stop. You have to write it all down, every time." So we did. That folder became a binder, and the binder became 3 binders, and every one of them sat on the shelf above my workbench where I could reach them without looking. Incident 1. A $400 fine for buffalo grass on land that was not theirs, and $50 for the color of a gate they did not own. I photographed the notice, photographed the survey pin, and filed it. That was the first day of the count. I want to be honest about something. My first instinct was to drive down to the clubhouse and lay the whole thing out, the deed, the decree, the delivery agreement, all of it, and watch Brenda's face fall in. I am an engineer. I like to solve a problem and be done with it. Sadie was right, though. And so was her mother's voice in the back of my head. A man who shows his whole hand on the first day teaches the other player to fold and walk away clean. A man who waits and files and lets the record build gets something better than a win. He gets a verdict. The second notice came 3 weeks later. Brenda had escalated the lawn fine to $100 a week for non-compliance, and she had added a new line item, a charge for a structure visible from the road that did not conform to architectural guidelines. The structure was my reservoir's headworks, the little concrete and steel housing over the headgate that controlled the entire canal. She had fined me for the very piece of infrastructure that watered her members' lawns, and she had done it without the faintest idea what it was, the way a person might fine you for the shape of the meter that runs their own house. Sadie wrote it down. Incident 2. I photographed it from 3 angles: the notice, the housing, the permit plate stamped into the concrete, and filed all of it. By the end of that first summer, the count stood at 9. 9 notices, $1,100 in claimed fines, and not $1 paid, because there was nothing to pay. I sent a single certified letter, drafted plainly on 1 sheet, no anger in it, stating that my parcel lay outside the association boundary as recorded at the county, that the structures she had cited were permitted and decreed, that I owed the association nothing, and that any further contact should come to me in writing. I drove it to the post office myself and watched the clerk stamp it and tear off the green return card. 11 days later, that card came back to my box with a signature on it, Brenda's own initials in the box marked received. I filed the card behind the letter. A man who keeps the green card has proof, in the other side's own hand, of the exact day they were told the truth and chose to keep going anyway. Then I waited to see what Brenda would do with a man who would not fight back the way she expected. What she did was get the county involved, and that is where she made her first real mistake. In the fall, a code enforcement officer named Ray Olvera drove up my road in a county truck. Ray was a calm, heavy-set man near my own age, who had been doing the job long enough to have seen everything twice. He had a complaint in his hand, filed by the association, alleging an unpermitted structure and a public nuisance on my parcel. "Walt," he said, because we knew each other a little from the feed store, "I have to follow up on this. It got filed, so I have to roll on it. you understand. I do, I said. Come look. I walked Ray up the draw to the headworks and showed him the plate on the housing, the permit numbers stamped into the concrete, the decree paperwork I kept in a weatherproof box right there at the gate. Ray read it slowly. He was quiet for a while. This is a state-decreed reservoir, he said. It is. And this headgate feeds the Stone Ridge Canal, I said. Has for 100 years. They signed a delivery agreement for it before the first house went up. I used to run it myself. Ray pushed his hat back. Walt, I am going to be straight with you. I have to log this complaint and a few more like it before anybody upstairs will treat it as a pattern. That is just how the office works. One complaint, I write it up and close it. A documented pattern of bad faith filings against a man who owns a decreed water right that gets a different set of eyes. You keep your records the way you have been. Every notice, every date, every dollar she claims. When you have got enough, bring it all at once. How many is enough? I asked. You will know, Ray said. It will be a lot. But when it lands hard. Don't show your hand early. He folded the complaint back into his jacket and looked up the draw at the water sitting flat and bright behind the dam. She fined you for that, he said, almost to himself. She has no idea what that is. She did not, and I was not going to tell her. The escalation that fall came faster because Brenda had started to feel the silence as defiance. She was used to people either paying or shouting, and I did neither. So she widened it. The second winter, she found out who came up my road and started leaning on them. I do a little machine work in retirement, repairing pumps and small engines for ranchers around the valley, cash mostly. A way to keep my hands busy and stay useful and to feel, on the good days, like the shop still meant something. Brenda got hold of the idea that I was running an illegal commercial operation in a residential view shed. She could not find my customers. So she did the next thing. She had the association post a private security contractor at the bottom of my road on the easement to photograph every vehicle that turned up toward my place and to tell my customers the road was under HOA jurisdiction and closed to commercial traffic. He was a heavy young man in a yellow vest with a folding chair and a clipboard of his own, parked in a sedan with a magnetic sign on the door. And he sat there day after day, like he was guarding something that belonged to him. The road was not under her jurisdiction. The easement was deeded to my parcel, recorded, mine to use and mine to grant. And it had been since before the subdivision was a line on a map. A rancher named Tom Briggs, who had been bringing me his irrigation pumps for years, called me one afternoon, embarrassed and angry, his voice coming through the shop phone in pieces. Walt, there's a fella in a yellow vest at the bottom of your hill, telling me I can't come up. Says it's a private community and I'm trespassing. I told him I've been driving this road 20 years, and he says he's calling it in. Tom, I said, you come right up. That road is mine. If he stops you, get his name and the name of the company on his vest and write down the time. Tom did. He drove around the man and came up the hill with his jaw set, and he wrote the encounter on the back of a feed receipt in pencil and handed it to me. The name off the vest, the company off the door sign, the time of day. Sadie copied it into the binder in her block letters that night. A clean entry with a date and a time and a company name. The security contractors showed up in my count 6 separate times that winter. 6 different customers turned away or challenged at the bottom of my own deeded road. And each one of them, once I asked, wrote down the encounter the way Tom had. Brenda had set out to scare my business away from my gate. What she had actually done was hand me 6 independent witnesses, each one willing to put a name and a date to her overreach. The thing about a man who keeps records is that the other side keeps making more of them for him. Every time Brenda reached for a new lever, she generated another dated, witnessed, documentable act of overreach, and every one of them went into the binder above my workbench. By the end of the second winter, the count stood at 23. 23 documented incidents, a claimed fine total north of $9,000. $0 collected. Zero, because there was nothing to collect. And I had a green certified card and a county officer's verbal acknowledgement to prove I had told her so. Then I found out why she was really doing it, and the whole shape of the thing changed. It was Sadie who pieced it together, of all people. She had a part-time job that spring scanning documents at the county clerk's office, and she came home one evening with a strange look on her face and a printout in her hand. "Dad," she said, "did you know the HOA filed for an annexation petition?" I had not. I read the printout at the kitchen table while my supper went cold. The Stone Ridge Vista Homeowners Association, with Brenda Hantz as the listed authorized agent, had petitioned the county to annex a 40-acre parcel into the development's boundary for a planned expansion. A second phase of luxury lots marketed around, and I read this twice to be sure, around a feature called Vista Lake, an amenity reservoir to anchor premium waterfront pricing. There was no Vista Lake. There was only my reservoir. The 40 acres they wanted to annex was the bench at the top of my draw, the dam, the headworks, and the water. The exact ground my wife's grandmother had hauled buckets across with a yoke on her shoulders, and the authorized agent on the petition shared a last name with the principal of the development company that had built Stone Ridge Vista and stood to build Phase 2. Brenda's husband, Dale Hantz, ran the company. I sat there and turned it over until it lay flat. The fines, the security guard at the bottom of my road, the nuisance complaints, the architectural citation on a headgate. The whole 2-year campaign of paperwork was not about my grass and never had been. It was a softening operation. Brenda was building a nuisance record, brick by dated brick, so that she could declare my parcel blighted, force a cleanup order or a tax sale, and hand her husband the one thing his second phase could not exist without, which was the water to fill a lake he had already drawn on a glossy board and priced by the lot. She had fined me $400 for my grass because she wanted my reservoir for her husband's development, and she still had not read the one document sitting in the same clerk's office where my daughter scanned files that said she could never have it. I sat with that printout for a long time. Sadie sat across from me, watching, the way her mother used to watch when I was deciding something. "Are you going to show them now?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "Now I want to see how far she'll go. Because the further she goes, the harder it lands." That was the spring the day and time stamps in the binder started coming closer together. Brenda must have known the annexation hearing was scheduled for the early summer, and she needed the nuisance record fattened up before it. So she pushed. A Thursday in April, she sent 2 members of her board up my road to post a notice of intent to abate taped to my gate, claiming the association would enter my property to remove the non-compliant structure if I did not comply within 30 days. The non-compliant structure was the headgate. She was threatening to demolish the control works of a state-decreed reservoir. Sadie photographed the notice on the gate with the date stamp on the camera, and we filed it. Incident, and a serious one, because now she had put in writing a threat to trespass and destroy decreed water infrastructure. A Monday in May, the security contractor blocked an ambulance. That is the one I will not forgive, and it is the one that ended any thought I had of going easy. Tom Briggs's father, old Cale Briggs, took a fall at his place a mile past mine. and the county ambulance came up the valley road and was stopped at the bottom of my hill by a man in a yellow vest who told the driver the road was private and closed. The driver argued. The contractor insisted. They lost 4 minutes at the bottom of that hill before the driver simply drove around the cone. 4 minutes that old Cale, thank God, could afford that day. Sadie was at the bottom of the road coming home from work when it happened, and she got the whole thing on her phone: the vest, the cone, the ambulance, the argument, the timestamp running in the corner. She came up the hill white-faced and shaking and handed me the phone without a word. I watched it twice. Then I made 2 copies, one to a drive in the fire safe and one to a drive I gave to Ray Olvera the next morning. "That is obstruction," Ray said, watching it in his truck with the phone propped on his steering wheel, playing it through twice. "That is not an HOA squabble anymore, Walt. That is a man interfering with emergency services on a public access easement. That crosses a line the county does not let people stand on." He looked at me, and there was something different in his face than there had been the year before. "How thick is that binder now?" 3 binders, I said. 26 incidents. The last one's that video. Ray was quiet. "The annexation hearing is in 3 weeks, he said. "County commission, open session, public comment. Everybody will be there. Her, the developer, the lawyers, the neighbors who think they're buying lakefront." He handed the drive back. If I were a man holding a decreed water right and a 100-year delivery agreement and 3 binders of bad faith filings, I would not say a word to anybody until I was standing in that room. Let her get up and tell a county commission on the record that she intends to build a lake she has no water for. Then you stand up. So that is what I did. I want you to understand that I did not plan a speech. I am not a speech man. I planned to bring the documents and let them do the only thing documents have ever needed to do, which is be true. The 3 weeks before the hearing were the worst of it, because Brenda, sensing the deadline, threw everything she had left. She filed a civil suit against me for the accumulated fines, now totaling a claimed $11,400. She ran a piece in the community newsletter describing my property as a derelict eyesore and a safety hazard, and naming me, which Sadie clipped and filed. And 4 days before the hearing, on a Saturday morning, she came up my road one last time in person, with 2 board members and the security contractor, and stood at my gate. "Mr. Keene," she said, "I am giving you a final opportunity to cooperate. The association is prepared to make this very difficult for you. We have a suit, we have the county, and after Tuesday, we will have the authority to enter and remediate this property. You are one stubborn old man, standing in the way of progress, and you are going to lose. The community has spoken." I stood on my side of the gate with my coffee and let her finish. Behind me, up the draw, the water sat flat and bright in the morning sun. The same water her husband had already drawn on a marketing map and called a lake. "Brenda," I said, "I'll see you Tuesday." That was all. She did not know what to do with it. She wanted a fight at the gate, and I gave her a Tuesday. She drove off angry, which was the only way she knew how to drive off. The hearing was held in the county commission chambers in Carter Springs, a plain room with a long bench up front and folding chairs for the public, and it was full. Brenda was there in the front row, in a blazer the color of a stop sign, with her husband Dale beside her in a good suit, and their lawyer, and a dozen Stone Ridge Vista residents who had been told they were about to vote on their new lakefront. Ray Olvera stood at the back in his county uniform. Sadie sat beside me with the 3 binders in a canvas tote in her lap, and a 4th thinner folder I had not let her look inside. The developer's lawyer presented first. He had renderings, glossy boards on easels, a blue lake ringed with luxury lots, and he spoke about tax base and amenity value and the bright future of Phase 2. Brenda spoke after him, and she was good in the way that performers are good. She talked about community standards and property values and the unfortunate situation of one non-compliant parcel, mine, that was holding back the whole vision. She used the word jurisdiction 4 times. She said on the record, into the microphone, that the association had every confidence the commission would grant the annexation so that the planned reservoir amenity could move forward. The chairman of the commission, a dry old rancher named Pace, asked the question I had been waiting 2 years for. "And the water for this lake," he said. "Where's that coming from?" The lawyer stepped back to the microphone. "The existing reservoir on the subject parcel," he said, "will be incorporated into the development as the amenity feature." Pace looked at his papers. "The subject parcel. That's the Keene parcel." "It is. Is Mr. Keene selling?" The lawyer hesitated. Brenda leaned into her microphone. "We anticipate that once the annexation is approved and the nuisance issues are resolved, the parcel will be brought into compliance one way or another." Pace let that sit in the room for a second. Then he looked out at the chairs. "Is Mr. Keene here?" I stood up. "I am." "You want to speak?" "I do." I walked to the public microphone with the canvas tote, and Sadie came with me and set the binders on the little table. I did not raise my voice. I told the commission my name, and that I had operated reservoir storage and delivery for that entire watershed for the last 11 years of my career before I retired, including the canal that watered Stone Ridge Vista. I said that the reservoir they were calling an amenity was a privately owned, state-decreed storage reservoir with a priority date older than the county itself, and that I owned it, the dam, the headworks, and the headgate, free and clear, and outside the association boundary by 40 feet, as recorded. Then I opened the thin folder I had not let Sadie see, and I laid 3 sheets on the table where the microphone could not pick up the sound, but the whole room could see my hands. The first was the decree. The second was the recorded deed showing my parcel boundary and the 40-foot setback of the association's own line. The third was the delivery agreement, signed by the development company, that obligated me to deliver water to the Stone Ridge Canal and obligated them to nothing on my land. I slid them across the table to the clerk, who carried them to the bench. And Chairman Pace put on his glasses and read. The room was very quiet. I have been in quiet rooms. This was the quiet of a lot of people doing arithmetic at the same time and arriving at the same answer. Pace read for a full minute. Then he looked up, not at me, at Brenda. "Mrs. Hans," he said, "this reservoir you want to annex and call a lake. Mr. Keene owns it. The decree predates the subdivision by about 90 years. And your development's own plat, recorded right here, draws your boundary 40 feet off his fence." He tapped the deed. "There's no water for your lake. There never was. You've been delivering water to your own subdivision this whole time, under an agreement that says it comes from his reservoir at his discretion." Brenda's mouth opened. For the first time in 2 years, she had nothing administrative to reach for. No line item, no guideline, no community standard, no jurisdiction. She looked at her lawyer, and her lawyer was looking at the renderings on the easels at the blue-painted lake that did not exist and never would. And he had gone the particular gray of a man, recalculating in real time what he had told a roomful of buyers. Dale Hans had both hands flat on his knees. Nobody in the room said anything at all. Somewhere, a folding chair creaked. The blue lake sat on its easel, bright and false, while the only real water for 40 miles sat flat and quiet behind a dam that the man at the public microphone had owned the whole time. "And these fines," Pace said, lifting the binders Sadie had set on the table, because Ray had quietly told the commission what was in it. "You fined this man $11,000 on land that isn't yours, posted a guard on his deeded easement, and that guard stopped an ambulance on a public road 3 weeks ago." He set the binder down. "The annexation petition is denied. And Mr. Olvera, I want this entire file referred to the county attorney for review of the abatement notice and the obstruction. Today. Here are the 2 numbers I want you to hold next to each other, because they are the whole story. 0. That is how many dollars of her $11,400 in fines I ever paid, and how many feet of my land her jurisdiction ever covered. And 90. That is how many years my family's decree predated the day she leaned over my gate and told me my grass was a violation. 0 against 90. She built her whole campaign on a number she never bothered to check, and it was 0 the entire time. Nobody clapped. It was not that kind of room. Brenda sat down very slowly, lowering herself into the folding chair like the air had gone out of her. And Dale was already turning to the lawyer with the look of a man recalculating a loan he could no longer service. Because Phase 2 had no lake, and a development marketed on waterfront with no water is a lawsuit waiting for its plaintiffs. Within the year, the company had defaulted on the Phase 2 financing. The bank that had lent against 40 waterfront lots discovered there was no waterfront, and the 40 acres they had tried to annex went back to dryland sage, which is what it had always been and all it was ever going to be. The renderings came down off the sales office wall. Brenda was voted out as president of the association that fall by the same neighbors who had come to the hearing expecting a lake, and gone home understanding they had elected a woman who picked a 2-year fight over water she never once checked the title to. The civil suit against me was dismissed with prejudice, every claimed dollar of it. The county attorney declined to file criminal charges over the ambulance, which I had mixed feelings about. But the security company lost its contract and its license to operate in the county. And that, I was told by Ray, hurt the principals worse than a charge would have. Because a license is a living and a charge is just a bad month. I did not gloat. I want to be clear about that. Because the temptation was there and I had earned it. I packed my binders back into the canvas tote, and Sadie carried the deed, and we drove home up the valley road past the bottom of my hill, where the yellow-vested man no longer stood. That evening, Sadie and I walked up the draw to the dam the way we used to with her mother, and we sat on the grass above the headworks while the light went gold over the water. The buffalo grass that Brenda had fined me $400 for was dry and silver, and exactly the color it was supposed to be at that elevation, in that month. The color it had been for 90 years. Mom would have liked today, Sadie said. She'd have told me to do it a year sooner, I said. And Sadie laughed, because it was true. We sat there until the water went dark. The reservoir my wife's grandmother hauled buckets from, the reservoir my father set the pins around, the reservoir I had run for a living and kept for love, sat right where it had always sat, holding the spring runoff for the dry months, feeding the lawns of the people downhill the way it always had. On my decree, at my discretion, the way the paper said. I thought about Diane's hand flat on the concrete of the headworks, and the thing she had asked me to do, which was keep it running. It was still running. It would keep running after me. Because Sadie had learned the most important thing there is to learn about land, which is that you defend it with paper and patience long before you ever defend it with anything else. So here is what I want you to take from this, plainly, because I told you at the start there would be a lesson, and I keep my word the way I keep my records. If somebody with a clipboard and a title tells you that your land, your water, your gate, or your grass is subject to their authority, do not argue with them at the gate. Go to the county and pull your own deed. Read it. Walk your boundary and find your pins. If you have a water right, find the decree and the priority date and put a copy in a box you can hand to a stranger. Write down every notice, every fine, every name, every date. The way my daughter taught me to, because the person overreaching is building your case for you. One dated act at a time, if you will only keep the paper. The loudest authority in the room is almost never the oldest one on the record. Let the record be older. Let it be true. And when the day comes, you will not need to say much at all. If you have got a story like this, an HOA, a permit office, a clipboard that overstepped, put it in the comments. I read them, and you are not as alone in this as they want you to feel. If this one was worth your evening, subscribe, because there are more of these. And the next one is a good one. A retired bridge inspector, a homeowners association that decided his 100-year-old stone bridge was an unpermitted structure, and the one inspection report that turned their whole demolition order into a felony. That is next time. I am Walter Keene. Read your deed. Keep your folder. Keep. And do not let anybody tell you the water is theirs when the paper says it is yours.